And we're live.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Wikimedia Tech Talks. Wikimedia Tech Talks is a monthly series that showcases speakers from the technical community. Today, we'll have Evan Prodromou, Product Manager for APIs in the platform team, here to discuss the Wikimedia Developer Platform. After Evan's talk, he'll take questions from the audience. You can submit questions through the live YouTube stream or through the Wikimedia Office IRC channel. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Evan.
Thanks, Sarah. It's really awesome to be here. I love being part of these tech talks. So like Sarah said, my name is Evan Prodromou. I'm a product manager for APIs in the platform team in the technology department of the Wikimedia Foundation. And what I wanted to talk to you about today is Wikimedia Developer Platform, a set of initiatives that we're working on to make Wikimedia content and data more accessible to web developers, internet developers, and the users that they serve. So, in this talk, I'm going to go through the vision for this Wikimedia Developer Platform, talk about the goals, the way the organization goals are aligned with this vision, really kind of fitting into the way the things that we want to do as a foundation and as a community and movement, which targets we're aiming for, which audiences we're trying to address and why, what the needs of those audiences are, what the product is that we're building that will satisfy those needs, and then a little bit about what the next steps are for this developer platform. So what's coming on in the near future for this process. I think I'd like for a second for folks to kind of imagine an app for bird watchers. Bird watchers could use the location data on their device as well as season, time of day, weather, to find out information on birds around them, the 10,000 species of birds that are sharing this planet with us and that are represented within Wikipedia and Wikidata. Birders could use the app to identify birds that they see in the wild, figure out probability of seeing different kinds. They could even correct data that's about those birds, update information, or add photos or recordings of the bird call. You can imagine a different kind of app, a browser plugin for job hunters. When they're looking at listings for a jobs website, they could get detailed pop-up information about that company's history, products, performance, competitors, major headquarters, locations around the world, news stories, scandals, awards, all the information that we have inside Wikipedia and sister projects presented in a way that helps them make decisions about where they want to apply and what kind of work that they want to do. They could also update or improve that information and share it with other job seekers around the world. You can consider a television recommendation engine that gives you suggestions out of the more than 600,000 movies and television shows that we have in Wikipedia and our sister projects. This recommendation engine could find information about movies that you like and then let you, as you're watching, update plot summaries or credits as you watch, selecting out the most touching or hilarious quotes. Going even a little further, you can imagine in the decades to come, there are going to be next generation interfaces for human-computer interaction, things like direct neural transplants, augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, stuff that's only been science fiction dreams before, but that research groups and commercial organizations are working on right now. These are modes of computing that we haven't even considered yet. Delivering the sum of all human knowledge to people who need it in new ways, in ways that we can't even imagine today. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, we are not going to build these apps. Oh boy. These aren't things that we're going to be creating within our organization. We just don't have the resources, the reach, or the understanding to go into all these different markets and provide applications for every single users in different places. That's not what our foundation does, and that's not what we can do. What we can do is give tools to the kind of developers who will be building these applications, right? So what we want to do is build an enabling platform that lets people build apps powered by free knowledge. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. This is an important part of our goals for the next decade, that we are working to become the essential infrastructure in the ecosystem of free knowledge, that we are building APIs that share structured data, rich media, content, and really encouraging reuse of that content in other areas. Everything that we're doing around redistribution and reuse is going to depend on enabling third-party developers to access content and data from Wikimedia projects. Now, when I say target users and target developers, what does that mean? And who are we talking about? After all, as many of you know, we already have APIs that are used quite a bit by developers around the world. So who are the developers that use our APIs? Obviously, our internal teams in our product department are using APIs for most of their work, especially mobile apps, but to some extent for web development also. We have a vast community of contributors that use our APIs in order to automate their contribution process. Often this appears as bots and bot edits, but there are lots of other ways that contributors are working to script and build macros around their contribution process and community process. There's also a big set of users that are syndicating our content and data out to other areas. These are folks like search engines or voice assistants that are trying to extract as much of that data and content as they can, and then put them in their own knowledge bases that they serve from external sources. So if you were going to kind of draw a conceptual and not accurate graph about the size of organizations that are using our APIs, you can kind of see like two hills here. There's one hill towards the small side, individual contributors, very small teams who are really working to script their contributions. On the right side, you know, the bigger organizations, big tech platforms, they're working to extract as much content out as they can, get them into their own knowledge bases and share those out. The important thing about this, again, conceptual diagram, is that we're leaving out a really important constituency of developers. These are small, medium-sized developers, you know, folks who are units, tens, maybe hundreds of developers in an organization, building mobile apps or building websites. And we want to make sure that they're able to use our content and data in new and interesting ways. This is really where the magic happens in the technology innovation area. These are the folks who make some of the most interesting stuff happening today, right? And we want to have the kind of developer experience that reaches this kind of app developer. Now, based on a lot of research, both developer interviews, competitive analysis, we've seen some things that app developers are looking for from our platform. Probably the biggest one is just getting started, having an easy onboarding process where they can land on a page and half an hour later be doing their first app, right? And that's something that we really want to be able to resonate with for them. Another is familiar app programming paradigms. We have built an amazing high-scale API system, as well as an amazing and Wikipedia scale set of interfaces, but these haven't really tracked with the mainstream of web APIs and web development. So it's become more and more unfamiliar for app developers, and they spend a lot of time scratching their heads. Having tools and documentation that let them get started with API work is also super important to them. Most of all, they want to have a clarity in their relationship with our organization so that they know that we're on the other side of the line, on the other side of the internet, and that they have an established relationship with us. That licensing and agreements are all right out there for them to be able to use. When I talk about what's familiar for this kind of developer, they're used to platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Google, to some extent, Amazon and Apple for building out web APIs and building out web applications that use those APIs. There's also a kind of long tail of software as a service, companies like Twilio, SendGrid, that provide APIs that this class of app developer is really using. So they're used to an experience from these commercial developers. One of the things that we need to do from our standpoint is give the familiarity of this developer experience to these app developers, but still bring our coherent values and community orientation to it. So our commitment to openness, our commitment to two-way contributions, etc. So whereas a lot of these platforms are optimizing for upselling these developers on freemium APIs, we're really looking for getting them to buy into our vision and help out with our mission. Are there other audiences that can benefit from having a new developer platform? Of course. I talked about community developers who have really established this culture around using the APIs that we have. But they could definitely benefit from more documentation, better documentation, more stability, lower maintenance, examples, etc. And of course, our internal development teams have worked really hard to build up the APIs that they need to execute on their goals. But having a API platform that they could depend on would make some of those tasks easier. And that's one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing too. Probably an important thing to note here is that one audience not addressed by this platform is major internet platforms. So we're not looking to serve those big syndicators who are trying to do a lot of that extractive work, syndication work. It's enough of a different use case, even though that they're making do right now with our APIs, that bulk syndication of Wikimedia project content is something that we want to address with other tools. Right now, API developers who are looking for bird watching data, weather data, company data, what are they doing to make do and get further down the line? A lot are using proprietary APIs where that information is available. They tend to be subject to different kinds of terms of service, changing needs of the commercial organization that's providing those APIs can make it pretty difficult to use those systems. Some use public domain data sets and then build their own API servers that use those data sets. Some will actually access Wikimedia project data. A typical system here, by far the minority, is to take the dumps for our major projects, filter those for a particular area of interest, and then use that for your own custom API. Obviously, when we separate out dumps to filtered dumps to external knowledge bases, that's going to mean that there's not really closing that loop of contribution. So the end users of those kinds of systems, if they're informed about their rights to reuse the data, which they often aren't, they don't really get to participate in our worldwide community and give back and share knowledge. There are also some commercial services that provide this kind of feature for free. So they'll take Wikimedia data repackage it and filter it, and then share it out with a commercial API. I think that is definitely an inspiration there, because it means that there's enough need for our content and data that it's a good signal that we could be providing good service to these developers. So what does the Wikimedia developer platform consist of? How is it going to fit into our world, and what is it actually going to do? I like to think about our front ends, and especially the service that we typically provide to end users, that we have a set of official front ends that we provide, and that users can use these to contribute, to read and write, and moderate and participate. The idea of this developer platform is that we're making a little space in that access so that third-party apps can provide new and interesting ways of accessing that content and data. And so what will we do in order to make this developer platform work for those apps? The first and most important part is developer onboarding. We are building an API portal that guides developers through signing up for a Wikimedia account, getting client IDs so that they can access APIs, and creating their first app. So the idea is that we're going to smoothly move developers into the system and get them working with APIs sooner and easier. This is a screenshot out of the upcoming Wikimedia API portal. The idea is that we're going to be really having the kind of onboarding experience that developers are used to from other platforms. If you go to developer.twitter.com or developer.google.com, you see a similar interface to this. And that's really what we're trying to do, is bring users in and give them the interface that they expect for getting started with our APIs. Second leg of this product is documentation. This API portal will have focused reference documentation about the APIs that are available through the API gateway. It's going to include tutorials, example code, coding templates, information about libraries. We're really trying to cover that experience from the developer's point of view and make sure that they have what they need to get successful quickly. Again, another screenshot from the API portal. We're looking to have the kind of interactive experience that folks are used to from other platforms. That kind of brings me to our APIs themselves. Probably the biggest part of this, the biggest change for code in this system is that we're going to be changing how APIs are routed. For most developers, when they're looking at our APIs, they can be bewildered by the vast variety of API endpoints that they have to work with. This is one of the biggest questions that I get as a PM for APIs is, I'm on English Wikipedia and I want to get this Chinese page. Well, you have to go over to this separate API server on Chinese Wikipedia. So we have across our hundreds of projects, all these different places to grab API information. Now, this is valuable in some senses, and it's like this for good reasons, both for reducing the number of connections that our web interfaces have to do, as well as being able to share web cookies between the web pages and the APIs. But for third-party developers who aren't building our web interfaces, that's not really that useful. And what they want to see is a single API server that where all the APIs live. And so the idea of this API gateway, API routing, is to bring all these API servers down to one single server, api.wikimedia.org. And then paths within that system will let you find pages on different projects and move quickly between them, but you maintain one connection to one server. This single server gives us an ability to kind of provide some clarity to those end users. Again, something that we're looking for. The other thing that happens when we've got the single server is that we have a curation process. Our organization, our movement has a lot of APIs. We have the Action API, which is built into MediaWiki. We have the MediaWiki Core API, Core REST API. We have the family of APIs that work through REST-based, as well as a cloud of other API systems that work off different parts of our infrastructure. The idea here is that we're going to be curating specific APIs that make sense for external developers. They don't have to go hunting around looking in different places for which APIs make sense for them. These are the APIs that are aimed towards their needs. Another part of this mechanism and part of that curation is going to be semantic versioning. This is something that we've been wrestling with within the MediaWiki Core API, and that we're bringing to this API developer platform. Semantic versioning is a strategy that encourages backwards compatible development of interfaces, that our interfaces are additive, that we add new features to an API without removing old features. And if we do have to remove old features in kind of a cataclysmic way for some reason, that we have a structured way to do that that gives our developers a chance to make that transition easily. So instead of having API endpoints or API systems that disappear overnight because the train went out and something disappeared, this is a way for them to have a dependable interface that they can count on long term, and that they have a relationship with us that means it's going to stay there while they're building it. Another part of the curation that I want to focus on is REST. REST is a paradigm for web APIs that has, for the last decade and a half, been the kind of industry standard for the way that we work with web interfaces. It uses HTTP in a way that is very cache friendly, and that works in the way that browsers and other HTTP libraries really expect things to do. We have a wonderful RPC style API, the Action API, and it is great in many ways, but the industry has kind of moved towards RESTful APIs, and we've seen that internally with our kind of family of REST-based APIs that are primarily used for our systems. So the idea here is that we're really going to be in that curation process is selecting REST APIs to go forward. The first APIs that we're going to be using are two. First is the core MediaWiki Core REST API. This is a very minimal set of API endpoints that expose the core of what MediaWiki does, both accessing pages, looking at page history, user contributions, as well as source and HTML versions of code. The other part of this is wiki feeds. So this is one of the REST-based APIs that's very interesting, and especially interesting for third-party developers because it gives featured content from our projects. Next part of this process, or part of this product, is OAuth. Our story around authentication and identification for both developers and Wikimedia users has been developing over the last decade and a half that we've had APIs. The world has moved towards OAuth, and specifically OAuth 2.0, the newest version of the OAuth standard. And we have been covering a number of different ways of authenticating users and authenticating applications. The idea with this is we are going to encourage in the API gateway that developers only use OAuth 2.0. And we're going to be kind of focusing on OAuth 2.0 as the preferred mechanism for accessing the gateway. The idea being that with that simplicity, we can also kind of encourage better performance, and that we can get simplicity in the ways that we're actually developing our systems. OAuth 2.0 has a lot of features that both identify developers in a way that they can control, as well as giving access to end users that gives them control over which apps can use their accounts and how they can use their accounts. So the combination is really powerful. I talked a little bit about client IDs. Our tradition within the Wikimedia Foundation has been to use the user agent header. So this is a HTTP header as the main identifier for our developers. And developers are supposed to pick a unique user agent in order to, whenever they're accessing our systems. Now, that's been a rule that's honored more in the breach than in its actual usage. But it also has, is a voluntary identification system. It is easily spoofed by other folks. It has no, there's no control on our side or on the developer side of that identifier. What we are moving to do with the new developer platform is to use OAuth 2.0 client IDs as the main way for our developers to identify themselves, so that when they are interacting with a user, when a user is looking, hey, which applications are using my account, as well as their interaction and relationship with the foundation and our systems is all identified with this client ID that they can keep private and protected. Again, with the app portal, we've got a way to manage the client IDs that are available to a developer, and they can create new client IDs, separate different client IDs for an app, even for different versions of an app, and use that in ways to control it. If they want to disable or delete a client ID, they can also do that, managing the interface with our systems. One important part of this API gateway that we wanted to bring up early was enforcing rate limits on API access. We have a mixed bag of rate limits within our organization for our different APIs. And they vary widely from API endpoint to API endpoint, as well as in the specificity of the API limits, right? So we have some APIs where the only limit is don't break our servers. We have others that are very specific, down to the number of queries per second. This is difficult for our third-party developers because they're used to getting rate limits from other organizations that are clear and easy to understand. So many, 10,000 API calls per hour, 50,000 API calls per day. Having us give them lots of errors and rate limiting problems because the rules aren't clear to them is a real deterrent from folks using our APIs. They walk away because they're like, these rules don't make sense to me, so it's not easy for me to understand. What we're doing with API Gateway and this developer platform is saying, okay, here is a set of API calls, a pool that you're allowed to use, we promise, and you're going to be able to apply this in your application. Also, you're going to be easily able to query and find out how many API calls you have left and see if you've gone over a limit. So it's a clear way for them to understand how API limits work and to interact with us in a way that they do with other platforms. One nice part about the API portal that we're working on is exposing API usage information, including when you go over your API limit, what your long-term use has been. One last part that I'm very interested in that we're thinking about and I think it's probably something that we'll be experimenting with as we build these APIs out further, is looking at APIs in the problem domain of developers. If you are working on a bird watching app, it would be nice to have APIs that have concepts like bird, location, climate, environment, rather than the solution domain, which is kind of where we are, which is either pages and users and revisions, or entities and properties out of Wikidata, right? So the idea here would be, can we find ways to expose more of the problem domain issues for certain kinds of users? This is something that's kind of more on the experimental side. It's not happening right now, but I'm excited about this as a potential for us. As far as the solution space, I do want to cover this because every time we talk about new technologies, we really need to talk about how they're getting made. The API portal, which I talked about before and showed some screenshots, is a MediaWiki site. We really think that we've got a world-class content management system that we've built over the last couple of decades. We're getting it just perfect and beautiful. And so the idea is that we're going to be using MediaWiki to do this API portal. It's built probably for the first time, I think, on Wikimedia Foundation servers. It's using a skin called Chameleon, which is really great for using Bootstrap and other systems, and makes it easy for us to build the kind of modern interface that folks are used to. We're doing custom extensions to manage the OAuth 2 API keys, as well as usage data and other kind of onboarding information. So most of those features are being built as MediaWiki extensions within MediaWiki. So that's the API portal, and it's really kind of the jewel in the crown on this Wikimedia developer platform. Obviously, when it comes to calling APIs, we're also building a system that's an API gateway. After some review of different options, we chose a server called Envoy Proxy Server, which is an Apache project that was designed to provide APIs at the kind of scale that we expect to do it. Envoy has a number of great features. One nice thing is that there's rate limiting systems built in that can satisfy some of the needs that we have within our goals for this product. There will also be some custom code that we will be building for Envoy around supporting OAuth 2.0 and supporting JWTs, which are the token format that we're planning to do. So I think that the expectation is that we're going to become a good citizen and member of the Envoy community and be providing as much as we can back up to upstream in this world. Now, are there challenges with this platform? Of course. This is a big change for the way that API developers look at our systems, and anytime there's big change, I think there's also big challenges. One is that the idea of community, right? Each time that we introduce more players between the end user who's reading or contributing content and the community where that content came from, there is a concern that they will be losing the culture and community of that world. Will a bird watcher who's using an app on their smartphone know that they're part of a worldwide community of editors, that they're in dialogue with contributors working through other interfaces? Will they be aware of their rights to reuse, revise, and redistribute the information that they've got? I think that this is going to be an important challenge here, that we bring the Wikimedia culture and community to these apps as much as we're bringing data and content. Because if we can't keep that flywheel of participation going, it hurts the ongoing development of our projects. Another question that I've had quite a bit when people talk about this is, like, if we make it easier for people to get get data or even provide data into our systems through these APIs, aren't we going to get, a flood of garbage contributions? I think that there's a lot of concern there. I think there's also been concern with that every time we improve our contribution experience, right? Bringing our contribution experience to users where they live right now, instead of asking them to come to our sites, it's a change that's difficult. I think that, our experience so far with making easier and improving, making easier contributions and improving the interface for contributions has held up to be pretty good. And I would kind of hold up Visual Editor as an example of like, hey, this is a great user interface that really makes it easy, and Wikipedia is better, not worse, for having it. Another issue is discovery. Like I mentioned, there are a lot of places for APIs within our kind of cloud of websites. And we want to make sure that API developers can find this API portal and find our systems. We also want to make sure that when we're reaching out to API developers, that we integrate that experience with outreach to open source developers, right? So I talked about having an API experience that's similar to Facebook, Twitter, or Google. None of those platforms let open source developers change their algorithms or change their running code on their websites, right? Like, we are not only providing a platform, but also an open source project and code that we run. And so making sure that we can take that discovery experience for someone who wants to participate and say, hey, this is one of the ways that you can improve access to free knowledge, is going to be an important part. If you have these skills, this is something that you can do. It's something that we need to have an aligned and harmonized message. Most of all, talking about message, I've talked about a lot of change, and change can be scary. Change can be confusing. Anytime we say not this, but that, this reaches a different audience than that reaches, there can be some concern that, something is going to go away, that something's going to disappear. I think the last thing that anybody on any team or area in the Wikimedia Foundation would want to do would be to take away tools that our community or partners are using and say, hey, you're not allowed to use these anymore. The message here has to be that we're reaching a new set of potential developers, and thus a new set of potential readers and contributors, not that we're taking anything away from everybody, because that's not the point here. The point is helping developers to bring our content and data to new parts of people's lives and to new communities. So what's happening next for this platform for building apps powered by free knowledge? Right now, my team, the platform team, is working on two aspects of this. I am working directly on the API gateway. That is the main kind of routing and rate limiting functionality built on Envoy. My colleague, Alex Pasculin, who's a documentation specialist within our group, is leading the effort on the API portal. And she's really doing a fantastic job there, both in creating the content, but also managing the team that's building out the special extensions and code. We hope to get into a beta period in Q1. Q1 for the foundation is, next quarter, so starting in July. If things go well, we'd like to launch then. Got a question mark, and we'll see how things go. The best results for this kinds of system are when we can get things into people's hands and really get them trying it and get moving forward faster. If you're interested, I realize that this link will not work if you are looking at the video, but I'm going to be posting the slides, and you can follow the links from within the slides. We've got a whole tree of Fabricator tickets where we're tracking this work. We also platform team has all our work information up on MediaWiki.org. You can also That is completely not my email address. I'm eprodromo@wikimedia.org. I'll fix that in the slides too. Don't know how that got in there. I don't know who gets that email. Be interesting to see what happens with that. Last thing I want to do before we get to questions is give some shout outs to my colleagues in the platform team and elsewhere who've been doing great work on this. Bill Perkle is a tech lead on the project. Will Duran's the engineering manager. Everybody on the platform team has been great, as well as folks from traffic within SRE. Eric Evans and Clara Andrewswani built the prototype for the Envoy server and kind of led the design and planning on that. Alex has been doing a fantastic job on the API portal. Hello Wealth is a contracting service that's building out a lot of the features there. Cindy Chicolis is also a colleague from Platform who's been doing a lot of the developer work and guiding that system along and to get it to deployment. And that's where I'll end. So hopefully the whirlwind tour of this new system raised a lot of questions, and I'll start answering them if we're ready. And thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Evan. And yes, at this time, we're opened up for questions. You can ask on the YouTube live stream or on IRC. I'll give folks a few minutes to ask some of those questions. I know that the YouTube live stream is a little bit behind. One of the things they want to mention is that you shared a number of links, and we can also post those to the Tech Talks page and to the YouTube page as well, so that folks can follow those. And we also put your updated email address on the YouTube page as well. So I do have a comment, not a question. It says this is a great thing, and I hope this will be a robust system. So that's really cool. And I will check IRC. All right,
Sarah, if I can take a second, I do want to kind of add an unmentioned shout out there, which is the great work that your team has done documenting the Action API on MediaWiki.org. I think it's been a real inspiration for this process in helping to understand how we can reach developers better. So kudos and thank you.
Awesome. So we do have a question on the IRC chat. How does the foundation feel about APIs that are rate limited and require registration in context of access to free knowledge? It seems that restricting free knowledge, not opening it further, regardless of whether it might be more convenient for off-wiki developers.
Oh yeah, super good question. Appreciate that quite a bit. Excuse me, I got a cough. So one part about this API gateway is that we are absolutely including for those developers and for users who need it, anonymous access to the APIs. So understanding that both for people who need to preserve their anonymity, as well as those who just want to experiment or try out APIs without going through an onboarding system, without having a formalized relationship through a client ID, that's allowed and perhaps even encouraged, right? So particularly for developers who are early on in their onboarding process, having to figure out client IDs, et cetera, API keys can be a little bit tricky, especially if you're running, say, if you're running apps from curl or you're running things through your client library or through a command line. So, but also we understand that anonymity is an important part of accessing free knowledge. And for those developers who need to maintain anonymity, we want to support them.
Awesome. I have a couple of questions on the YouTube live stream. Rudolph asks, you spoke about getting this into people's hands to start playing around with. Are you interested with working with some partners for this during the partner phase?
Absolutely, definitely. So I think that probably the important part for this evaluation phase is going to be figuring out who, getting that feedback in a quick loop and turnaround on that is great. If you're interested, reach out to me by email.
Great. And then we have another question from the live stream. You mentioned interesting examples for tech integrations, and in the partnerships team, as you know, we explore several inbound requests to do this. Are APIs the same as all WP languages?
Yes. Yeah. So within the API gateway, the intention is to have all languages and projects supported within the API gateway. Intention is not always is not always perfect. We have some situations where some of the projects don't have structured data that allows us to provide some of this functionality. Wiki feeds is a good example there. The team has done a really great job in getting a lot of feeds information, and article of the day, etc. One of the things that we hope to do after this is out is expand that to more different languages and making it possible for different languages and different projects to participate in that, because we think it's really kind of important.
Awesome. So we have a couple questions from IRC as well.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is, will there be strict limits per IP on anonymous requests that are significantly lower than developers with accounts and keys?
Will there be strict limits on IP addresses? I think the idea is that IP addresses will be, so we will be doing anonymous access by IP address. And so rate limiting by IP address. And the idea is that we don't want to be driving folks to doing a lot of IP gamesmanship, right? Like changing your IP address to get around rate limits. I would definitely recommend that if someone was like so concerned about using systems anonymously, and they didn't want to participate in this kind of client ID system, I would definitely recommend that they keep using the same mechanisms that they've been using up until now, right? Because those aren't going to change. They're still going to be there. I think the intention is to support folks who need anonymity and folks who want to experiment. But like the idea here is to encourage use of client IDs.
Great. Okay, this talk has been really great. There are so many questions. So our next question is from IRC. What will the semantic versioning mean for the underlying MediaWiki code? Just adhering to the existing stable interface policy or something more?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think the thing is that underlying MediaWiki code has its own stable interface policy and things that we're encouraging there. For APIs, we've got kind of a different standard, right? So this is something we're exposing things. Semantic versioning is just a structure where we say, if we change this interface, then you're going to know that we changed the interface because the major version number changes significantly. And it means you're going to be reaching different paths to get to that API. So what does this mean from a product standpoint? It means that we're more careful with adding and removing API endpoints. And from a end user developer standpoint, it means that we're going to be providing a more stable interface.
Awesome. So we have another question. Is there support for developers who jump into this and hit some roadblocks, or is it more self-service?
There's support. Yeah, I think at least initially there's going to be support through a number of different mechanisms. Obviously, on wiki participation is an important part of the way our culture works. So that is important. I believe we're intending to do some more direct support, either through mailing lists or through direct emails.
Awesome. So I have a couple of questions from IRC. Will there be opportunities for community participation during the beta period? Q1 beta to Q1 launch seems like a short time frame to collect comments from stakeholders.
Yeah, I think that's why there's a big question mark there. I think that the idea is to get that kind of feedback as soon as we can from the people who are participating in the gateway and who are using it. I think that if we ran into major roadblocks like early on, I don't think that's anything we're expecting. But if we came onto that, we'd kind of deal with them as they came up. But yeah, the idea is that we really want folks to be participating in this process.
Perfect. And then I have another question from IRC. On the parsing team that works on wiki text and generates HTML that has a spec, we might expect to make changes to the HTML, and this will probably impact the API itself. How should we handle this? And this person wants to clarify that they're talking about changes over time, not one change.
Yeah, this is an interesting one for us because there is some expectation that the format of output HTML. So output HTML is a difficult beast because we can either treat it as kind of unstructured content, right? Like that it's really for use formatted content, or we can treat it like structured data that should be parsed apart. I think the idea is that we want to treat it more like unstructured content and that we're providing data structures for that structured content separately. So that, say, someone who's looking to parse tables out of a Wikipedia page would be able to get that structured data in another way. That said, we are going to be looking at version changes, and changes in that structure. Hopefully, if there are non-backwards compatible changes, if we need to, we make a version change and we deal with that as it comes out. So hopefully, it's not something that's going to be catastrophic. Ideally, changes to HTML output would not be something that we'd need to make a version change in semantic versions. But I think it's probably worth considering on a case-by-case basis.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm looking at both IRC and the live stream, and I'm not seeing any more questions. So I'll just do a really quick last call for questions. And Evan, do you have anything else you want to share in that while we're waiting to see if anybody steps in?
Let me think. No, I mean, I think probably the big thing that I want to encourage is that this is an effort that we're trying to make as part of a larger community, part of a larger movement, and that movement participation in that is super important. One of the one thing I'd probably like, one last shout out is for Sam Reedy, who contacted my team about a month ago and was like, hey, we need more information about what you guys are doing. And so that kind of started some discussion internally, like how are we doing with outreach, and kind of influenced us deciding to do this meeting. So I wanted to say thanks for that because it's turned out pretty nicely.
Yeah, that's great. It's always good to keep people informed. It looks like we have one more question on the live stream.
Sure.
Will all APIs, even ones used by internal foundation teams, be in the portal?
Yeah, super good question. I think the intention here, so there's kind of two halves of this. The intention here is to support these external developers. However, if we see that this infrastructure is helpful, and especially if it is helpful for our internal development, it may make sense for some of those APIs to come into that API gateway, right? Whether it is at the same URL or at a different URL, whether we map those URLs by path, If we haven't really been addressing the idea of like internally focused or internally oriented APIs. That said, we do have this mechanism called REST-based that's currently doing it, and having like two different frameworks for doing it doesn't make a ton of sense. So there is kind of an expectation that we may want to revisit that REST-based structure and use this new tool set instead. So the answer is not to begin with, but if it's found to be useful, definitely may make sense.
Great. So it looks like we don't have any other questions on IRC of the live stream. What I'd like to do is encourage folks, you can reach out. We actually shared Evan's email, so hopefully, Evan, you're okay with people asking you questions. And then also, just so you know that after the talk, I had a few questions in the live stream about this. We do compile links, and Evan will we'll put slides up on Commons for folks, and this video will also be archived here on YouTube for you to look at as well. So you should be able to find any information that you need about it, and also feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. So I'd also just like to thank Evan for talking today. This has been a really great talk. I love when we have so much community discussion, so this was really cool. And then I also want to thank Brendan for handling the AV as always. This was really great. Thank you so much. Awesome.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.